Alrighty, this lesson we will be factoring trinomials. At the end of this lesson, you'll be able to factor a quadratic trinomial. Okay, first of all, we're going to do a little review, and then we'll talk about what it means to factor a quadratic trinomial and then actually do examples. So this first one, if I ask you to simplify this, some people are arrow drawers and some people are box drawers. I think most people are arrow drawers, so that's the way that I'm going to do that. If I were to multiply this, remember we do x times x, which will be x squared. X times negative 6 will be negative 6x. 2 times x will be positive 2x. And then 2 times negative 6 will be negative 12. Okay? If I combine like terms, I'm going to get x squared minus 4x minus 12. Please notice that I ended up with a quadratic trinomial because the highest power is 2 and there are 3 terms. So what we are going to do when we factor a quadratic trinomial, we are going to start with the quadratic trinomial and we are going to end up with what it looked like before I multiplied it. So that's where we are headed. Okay, so the next one, it says our examples are to factor the following trinomials. So this is how we are going to do it. We are going to be combining some factoring by grouping and factoring using the GCF to help us factor these trinomials. So the first thing I do want to make sure it is a quadratic trinomial. The highest power is 2 and there are 3 terms, so that's good. One thing that I always usually get rid of, but this time I'm going to add in, is a 1. So the first thing that we're going to do, we're going to have to do this on every problem just to set us up. Again, what we're trying to do is get this set up for factoring by grouping, but you'll notice that I'm going to factor by grouping. I need 4 terms and I only have 3. So we're going to try to get this middle term split into 2 terms, and this is how we're going to do it, okay? First step is we're going to take the first number and multiply it by the second number. So we're going to take 1 times 2 and we are going to get 2. Okay, and then what I'm going to do is just list the factors of 2, like what times what would give me 2. The only thing that I can think of is 1 times 2. And you'll notice if I add these, 1 plus 2 will equal 3. So notice the 1 plus 2 gives me that number in the middle. So what we are going to do is split the 3x into 2 parts. We're going to make this 1x squared plus 1x plus 2x plus 2. All right, so we turned this 3x into 1x plus 2x. All right, so that's what we did first. Now, this should look up like a problem that's familiar because we just finished factoring by grouping. So now we are going to factor by grouping. So I'm going to group the first 2 and I'm going to group the second 2. All right, so in the first 2, we are going to decide 1 goes into both of them and they both have an x. So I'm going to factor out an x, start my parentheses, divide out an x. So I'm going to get x squared over x. That's going to reduce to x, bring down my plus sign, and then my x's zap out. I am left with 1. Okay, I'm going to bring down that plus sign. And then if I look at this one, the GCF is going to be 2. Start my parentheses, divide both parts by 2. 2x divided by 2 is just 1x, plus 2 divided by 2 is 1. And very nicely, like we're used to having happen, now both terms both have an x plus 1. So we're going to factor out that x plus 1, start parentheses. I'll write that underneath each part. Again, you might be past that step, which is fine. X plus 1 zap, I'm left with x. Bring down my plus sign. X plus 1 zap, I'm left with 2. So that is what the quadratic trinomial looks like factored. If I multiplied this back out, I will get what I started with. All right, that might have been a lot to absorb, so let's try another one till we get this. Alrighty, so once again, it's a quadratic trinomial, so that's all good to go. I'm going to put a 1 in front. We're going to multiply these 2 numbers together, so 1 times negative 15 is negative 15. And what I'm trying to do, again, we want to split that negative 2x up in the middle. So if I look at negative 15, I could get negative 15 times 1, negative 1 times 15, negative 3 times 5, negative 5 times 3, and now what we're going to be trying to do is add those numbers. Okay, negative 15 plus 1 is negative 14, negative 1 plus 15 is 14, negative 3 plus 5 is 2, and negative 5 plus 3 is negative 2. So if I look at which one of those should I pick, I wanted to get negative 2, I'm going to pick this one right here. So I'm going to split my problem up now. So I'm going to have x squared minus 5x plus 3x minus 15. Again, we're trying to split that middle number up into 2 different terms. So now that I've done that, I am going to use factoring by grouping. Alrighty, so the first one, I can factor out an x, because that's the GCF. If I do that, I'm going to get x minus 5, bring down that plus sign, all right, and then I notice that 3 is the GCF for the next part. If I divide both sides by 3, I will get x minus 5. And once again, very nicely, this should always happen. They both share the x minus 5, so we'll factor that out. That will be our new GCF. Write that under each part. Okay, this x minus 5s are going to zap out, so I'm left with x. The x minus 5s will zap out. I'm left with the plus 3. And so that's what that quadratic trinomial is going to look like factored. Alrighty, let's take a look at example 3. I'm going to do just a couple more with you, and then we'll let you try one. Let's see, am I going to let you? Yep, I'm going to let you. I'm going to do 2 more, and then you get to try number 5. Okay. What we're going to do again on this one is it's a quadratic trinomial, so I'm set doing this method. We're going to take 1 times negative 18, and then we're just going to write down some choices. Negative 6 times 3, negative 3 times 6, negative 9 times 2, negative 2 times 9. I could keep going if I have to, but let's just see where we're at. Put plus signs in between now. Negative 6 plus 3 is negative 3, negative 3 plus 6 is 3, negative 9 plus 2 is negative 7, negative 2 plus 9 is 7. I have found an answer. I wanted to get positive 7. This is the one that's going to do it for me. So we are going to split that problem up. So now I have x squared minus 2x plus 9x minus 18. I am now ready to factor by grouping. So 2 together, 2 together. Alrighty, so now from here, we are going to factor out an x. That will be our GCF. So if I divide that, x squared over x is going to be x minus, the x is zap, so I'm left with 2. Bring down that plus sign. The GCF of the second part is 9. So if I divide both parts by 9, 9x divided by 9 is just 1x minus 18 divided by 9 is 2. Once again, now the GCF of this next is x minus 2. Start my parentheses. Divide by x minus 2. They zap out. I'm left with x. They zap out. I'm left with the plus 9. And I am now factored. Okay, I'm going to do one more with you, and then you get to try one on your own. Here we go. Alrighty, so I'm going to put a 1 in front. 1 times 6 is 6, so let's just write down some choices. 1 times 6, 3 times 2. That's really all I can think of by right now so far. Let's try my pluses. 1 plus 6 is 7. 3 plus 2 is 5. Notice I got close, but I needed a negative 5. So let's try this. Let's try negative 3 times negative 2. Negative 3 times negative 2 is still 6. And when I add them, I'm going to get negative 5. So this is the choice that I get to use. So if I rewrite the middle, we'll get x squared minus 3x minus 2x plus 6. I am now ready to factor using grouping. So 2 and 2. So from here we will have, my GCF will be x. If I divide it out, I'm going to get x minus 3. This next one, notice I have a negative, so my GCF will be negative, negative 2. Divide out the negative 2. That's going to give me x. 6 divided by negative 2 is negative 3. Very nicely, again, you'll notice my GCF is x minus 3. So we're going to factor out that x minus 3. We are going to write it underneath each part. These zap, I'm left with x. These zap, I'm left with minus 2. So that is what it's going to look like factored. All right, it is now your turn. We're going to do example 5. So we've got x squared plus 6x plus 9. Please pause the video. Go try it, come back and see how you do. Alrighty, so for this one we are going to, same thing, we're going to put the 1 in front. 1 times 9 is 9. What times what gives me 9? 1 times 9, 3 times 3, that's all I can think of, so I'm going to go ahead and add in my pluses here. 1 plus 9 is 10, 3 plus 3 is 6. I found it because I was looking for 6, so this is my choice. So to split it, we're going to put x squared plus 3x plus 3x plus 9. We are now ready to factor using grouping. Here we go. Boom. GCF of this part will be x. If I divide it out, I will get x plus 3. Bring down my plus sign. GCF will be 3. If I divide out the 3, I will get 1x plus 3. They both have an x plus 3, so we get to factor out the x plus 3. Start my parentheses. Write this under each part. They zap, I'm left with x. They zap, I'm left with plus 3. And then that would be my answer. So we will do, my next video will be part 2 of factoring trinomials. So now hopefully you are somewhat comfortable factoring a quadratic trinomial.